Welcome everybody to Lore Lords. Appreciate y'all waiting while we took a nice Thanksgiving break. I hope you enjoyed it well. Last time we talked about Verdun in World War I. Well, we're deciding to talk about that sequel in World War II, baby. Let's see what the hell the two boys have got to talk about. I'm looking forward to it, and I finally got over the stupid fucking national parks episode. I still think about it, but I mean, I'm over it. I'm not mad at Atlas anymore, you know what I'm saying? I also started seeing a therapist, so that really helped.
I didn't think it was stupid at all. I thought it was a great episode.
No, I thought it was really great. I think he's just scared. I wouldn't worry about it. he's just kind of scared of you.
That's okay. I get it. I'm intimidating.
Oh, no, I mean, absolutely. And the idea that you could just walk into a national forest and get dragged away by, like, a Wendigo is pretty horrifying.
Yeah, it happens.
Yeah, definitely happens. Probably more than we think.
But that's not what we're talking about, no.
Ah, yeah, beat me to it. That's not what we're talking about.
Today's a sequel episode, right?
That's right. On last time.
Pat, did I just lose you? What just happened?
No. Sorry, I'm sorry. Last time, we talked about World War I and Verdun, like Tommy Two Tits said. We focused on Verdun, but there was like a lot of, in order to talk about one specific battle in an overall war, you kind of do have to talk about everything going on. And I loved the conversation, and I was really obsessed with when we were talking about how World War I was kind of like the old world and the new world were meeting and clashing in a very brutal way, where like people were still lining up and doing charges, and they were still like doing things like wearing bright colors to symbolize their national pride as opposed to camouflage to keep themselves hidden. Like they weren't, war was about ego still as opposed to just like defense and stuff like that, and like strategy and winning. And that still definitely takes a part to play in the next follow-up, World War II, obviously. There's a lot of ego problems, particularly with one Mussolini and one Adolf Hitler. But it wasn't necessarily the ego of a nation as more as it was like egos of ethnicity and such and things like that. So it was a different kind of pride as well. But
more of a world domination obsession.
Yeah, which was like really like a supervillain level, like crazy shit.
Yeah,
but
World War I was basically like, you shot first, I'm gonna go after you, and then it escalated so rapidly into no one knew what they were doing. But World War II was just kind of like, you know what? I think I'll take over the world this summer.
Yeah, basically. Like, Hitler's literally, like, his main strategy was he's just like, oh, I need to make the Aryan population bigger by way of taking over the world. That was, like, if there's any other, like, that's it. That's the plan. There's no depth to it. That's it. If you want to understand Adolf Hitler's plan, it was literally make Aryan population big by way of taking everything over. But Europe will have to do for now. That was, like, so, he focused on Europe, obviously, because that's where he was, But like, how do you make a villain like that? How do you make such a vile and grotesque human being like Adolf Hitler? Well, first of all, actually, it was mentioned briefly in the last episode that he was actually a soldier in World War I. Now, he wasn't a frontline, digging in the mud, in the trenches soldier. He was a messenger. So it isn't to say that he didn't necessarily fire his gun. He may have, I don't know. But, like, he might have, like, gotten to a place, dropped off a note, oh, gee, pop, 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 and then left. But he wasn't, he wasn't dug in. not what Adolf was all about. That isn't to say that, there wasn't valiant service there, but people automatically listen. There's some sort of respect that's immediately earned when you kind of talk to somebody and they're like, oh, I'm a veteran.
Yeah.
And then especially, like, so when you have, like, you have that, so and plus Adolf had a deep love and pride for his country. He loved Germany.
He loved Austria. Oh wait, what'd you say?
No, we'll get there. But he loved Germany. He did. Like he had a lot of pride in his heritage and being German. And so that plus the humiliating defeat in World War I, which, by the way, again, to a lot of Germans, World War I's, like, they were there because they were fighting alongside somebody else that started it. Like, they were just defending an ally as opposed... That's something that is oftentimes forgotten about. It's like, yes, they were kind of brutal, and their Battle of Verdun, for example, is a good example of brutality in World War One and the Germans' arrogance and stuff like that. But they like, in World War One, they came to the defense of an ally as opposed to being the aggressors necessarily. So they weren't necessarily as aggressive. And France in World War One was some would argue, could be way more aggressive. And so, with that in mind, take away everything you know about what Hitler did and try to put yourself in, like, a 1920s Adolf Hitler. You know what I mean? Like, where it's just like, this is before he did all these things and he's just making these campaigns. Like, so at this time, the Treaty of Versailles basically fucked Germany. Because they had a lot to pay. And they had so much to pay and they couldn't pay it. Like, there was no way they'd be living in this debt for a long time. And so, like, that was one of the many things that kind of fucked them up. And at the same time, you have Benito Mussolini in Italy, who's also, like, that man has been studying. He was, at first, when he was younger, he was like, oh, I'm a socialist, a peaceful socialist, a pacifist socialist. I want everybody to get taken care of by the government as a whole. And then he realized that you can never take over without violence, and he went basically, like, straight comic book villain evil, and Benito Mussolini went, like, fascist dictator. He also got thrown out of Italy, like, shitload of times. But anyway, like, that in his early life before he became fascist dictator.
Are you gonna talk a lot about him, about his early life?
Not too much. No, that was basically what I was gonna cover. Is that he was?
It's just a fun thing to note that he was, like how you were saying, he was a very peace-loving socialist.
Yes,
and he was a journalist.
Yep,
that's what right. He did. And he was a writer. He was a journalist and a publicator, and all he did was publish peace-loving magazines. And if you can literally look at them online and see as they start becoming. They're very much like, yeah, we got screwed in World War One, but, like, let's get through it together, guys. Like, let's build relationships. Let's build bridges. And then it keeps going to, like, you know what? Maybe these bridges should be built, but we should be watching them. You know what? Fuck the bridges. And then, you know what? Burn the bridge. Like, it just goes radical. It's crazy.
Yeah, exactly. It was something that, like, again, it's very, very fun to kind of look into that. Oh, God. Because he actually got thrown out of Italy, or he left Italy originally because he didn't want to join the military. Because there was a law in Italy at the time where, like, if you had to do some service there, and he didn't want to join the military, whether it was because he was a coward or whether it was because he genuinely didn't believe in warfare, it's not the point. He eventually did serve his time in the military. He didn't do anything. I literally don't think he did anything. Like, he was just, like, stood around guarding basically, and then he became a teacher for a little while too. But, like. And then basically those two things, serving as a teacher, which he was bad at, and and then doing actual service in the military, he then just went full bore socialist and shaved his head.
Yes, he did.
And then so anyway. So then we have Mussolini, the fascist dictator, taking over, and the idea, though, of this kind of nationalistic pride is becoming a big deal also in Germany. So whilst Adolf is talking about all the things that he did in World War One, I want
to butt in for a second, on the last thing about Mussolini is just for anybody who paid attention to our country, United States of America, in the last 4 years. There was this famous saying that he used to claim the throne of fascism, which was Italy first.
Anyway, moment of silence. Another moment of silence.
So back on World War II.
Anyway, World War II. So Hitler. So anyway, that Hitler guy. So anyway, Hitler sees this. So first of all, those might not know this, but the race to fascist dictator was first place was Benito Mussolini, not Adolf. Although he shortly followed, he was like right after. But like So for those who think that like Hitler started the trend of bad boys in Europe, it's like no. He was basically a result of. But that kind of nationalistic pride was becoming big in Germany because Germans themselves are going like, hey, we're still great guys, fuck all these debts that we owe these people and everything. And meanwhile, by the way, France is just like celebrating all throughout like they're just like, we won World War One, we did it, we're drinking all the time. They basically didn't upgrade that much. They didn't learn that many lessons from World War One. It's something that actually, like, we talked about last week or 2 weeks ago for Verdun, was that they had one road to get to the supply line to Verdun. So like, and it was so inefficient, and they had to constantly be fixing. They had like NASCAR pit stops to fix cars and buggies and carts and stuff as they went along. They didn't evolve that much. They were they did motorcycles now, which was a cheaper, a quicker way of transportation for messaging and stuff like that. They had more roads, sure, but they were still on horseback a lot of the time too, and a lot of their guarded areas were still full of drunk people. Meanwhile, like in Germany, all their stuff like got kneecapped. Like they got what their army was reduced to 10% of its size or something like that. It was like 15%, and then they couldn't have an air force anymore after World War One. And Germany, so yeah, they lost like 80-90% of their military force. They were no longer allowed to use Air Force, and they also had to move troops out of like basically the Belgian-France border area, which was called the Rhineland, I believe. So they had to pull all the troops out of there. So basically leaving Germany open for any at all like what Western moving force. So Eastern moving force. So any like Europe, Spain, Jesus Christ, Britain, Spain, like France, Belgium, any of those things could just go into the Rhineland and go into Germany, and they'd be basically defenseless. But that was the whole Treaty of Versailles was that no one would do that. Everyone would live in peace.
And and the League of Nations would never allow anything bad to happen. The end.
Yes, right. Meanwhile, by the way, because this is World War II, this happens all over the world. So you have Benito Mussolini, who's rose into fascist dictator power in Italy. You have Hitler, who's rising to power, bringing together fascism together in a very similar way, where like, although instead of being a peace-loving socialist early on, he was not. He was an artist, actually. Hitler was always a racist scumbag. That was also true. He did not come from, like the peace-loving socialist, like democratic socialist side of things. He was like the fascist dictator side of like socialist kind of thing, because he did rise through the same similar, I should say, way as Mussolini. But meanwhile, on the other side of the world, you had an isolated Japan. Now, what was going on with Japan? Well, they were about isolated for 200 years. Until what country? That's right, us, baby, the United States of America, and I think England probably too. They were part of this. It was probably Europeans in general. We started forcing them to trade with us. We went to them and was like, hey, trade with us.
The first people were Portugal.
Portugal was the first.
And then it was the first white men of European descent to appear in the country of Japan and really start to shake things up were Americans.
Yeah. And we were starting to trade with them, and we basically were like bullying them to trade. And bear in mind, this was an isolationist nation. They wanted to just do their own thing. And also bear in mind, Japan at this time was Imperial Japan. So they were at their like peak pride. And they had some of the most brutal practices in this time's history. Like, it really, like, if you go into Japanese history and like around before World War II, it was pretty fucking crazy, and they didn't really want to take part because they didn't really need anybody else. Japan was very they had everything they needed themselves, and if they needed anything, they'd take it, and they didn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of what ended up happening. So as trade increased with like the Americas and Europe and stuff like that in Japan, the Japanese noticed that they were actually getting incredibly fucked out of deals, and we in America were actually kind of fucking with them a bit. Like, we weren't giving them fair trades. We weren't doing it. Europe wasn't doing it. They weren't getting fair trades from basically anybody, which genuinely sucks. So what did they do? Well, they said fuck that, and they decided to start kicking down doors and taking shit. So they went to China and Russia and what is now known as the Koreas, and they basically just started to. They landed troops there and started taking things. Also, in this World War I believe it was too, to date back even to go back a little bit further, they took islands back from Germany, actually. Germany had a lot of colonies on the islands south of Japan, and like near the Philippines and north of Australia and stuff like that. Germany had a lot of colonies, and Japan in World War One took those. So like that's kind of, again, so Japan has been very much known to be the aggressors and take what they want, and so after a while, that's kind of what's been going on with Japan, and they actually kind of poked at Russia, and they were starting to win. So, well, that's actually when the fighting began. So I got a little ahead of myself a little bit.
It was 1910 when Japan took over Korea, and that was their first mainland.
Yeah.
Like,
so that's
holding.
That's pretty fucking early on, yeah. Like,
yeah, so
really
Japan in 1910, which is just before the First World War, got a mainland kingdom. They just took over Korea. Korea existed. It was an ancient kingdom. Yeah. Korea was around since the 900s. Yep. And then Japan just stomped them out of the ground.
You can play them in Age of Empires. You can play Korea.
Yeah, Korea's a very famous. They had the medieval presence. They had a Renaissance presence.
That's pretty cool.
Japan took them out and used that as a base, which is a big deal because going from an island nation to a mainland included nation is a huge step in the ability of where you can go and what you can do.
And that was basically why they could stomp Russia and China so effectively too in the future. So, all right. So now we have all of our Axis players ready. You know what I mean? So we have all of these boiled up tensions. So we have bad trade deals and just taking advantage of a very isolated nation of Japan. You have a humiliated and defeated and completely dismantled Germany from World War I, and then you have Italy, which was actually on the Allied side fighting against Germany in World War I, but they got less than they thought they were going to get. They thought they were going to get like all the way around into Greece and stuff like that, like all the territory on the coastlines of Greece and the Mediterranean, but they barely got any of that territory, so they felt like they were cheated out of a lot of land, so they didn't like that. And so you have this, and then now you have this fascist, Italy. So right there you have all the workings of a shit brew range. We got a shit storm, Randy.
I can feel the winds coming.
I can feel the shit winds blowing, Range. But rest in peace, John. What was that? Oh, what was his last name? Dunsworth? Something like that? Anyway.
Yeah, Dunsworth,
yeah. Mr. Leahy. So anyway, our Axis pieces. So meanwhile, let's check on the Allies. What are they doing? Again, France is still basically drifting off of their fucking win in World War I. They really are. They haven't upgraded too much. America went through the Great Depression, so we're not doing great.
So another thing I want to bring up to defend my love of French history in World War II and one is and just French military history. They did do one massive improvement, which is the Maginot Line. And the Maginot Line was to make sure a world war would never happen again, and if it did, Germany wouldn't be able to push through, and it was a massive line of forts, even greater than the ones we talked about last week that were done, basically held off. And it did work, but we'll get into that soon. But just for the record, that was a huge deal. The Rhineland had a massive wall of guns watching it. Yeah.
So let's we're not talking. In America, sometimes we trash on France for whatever reason, and this is basically like the reason why is because of and obviously I'm not talking about it when the action begins, because France ended up retreating in World War II. But like when you understand why and how the Germans took over, like you would have lost too. It's one of those things where like France isn't. And they've never been, and people should really knock it off. Like we Americans should knock it off, even though it was, I guess, when we were teenagers, it was funny to rip on it. But like France has always been one of the biggest forces to be reckoned with, at least in terms of ideology and passion. Like if French people hate and love their own country more than anybody hates or loves their own country, and this is no exception in this time in World War II. And they like no one can do France like the French. I guess is the best way to say it.
Yeah, and you did mention how they were drunk and happy all the time, because at the beginning of World War II, France was full of patriotism. They loved it. Everyone loved France. Yeah. France, Vive la France. That's what everyone cared about.
Yeah, of course. So, absolutely. They especially after everything that happened, they had the stories of Verdun. You know what I mean? Like that. Well, literally all the stories that you said, and like. like 2 weeks ago. They were telling their kids that, and like the heroes of this is what your dad did.
Yeah, and then they also had a reputation because it wasn't that long ago that little Napoleon dude kind of took over the world.
That's right.
It wasn't that long before the First World War.
You're right. You're absolutely right. So, like, again, France has always had quite a bit to be pumped about. And then what do we have going on in England? Well, we have Chamberlain as the prime minister, I believe, at the time. He's good. He's decent in peacetime, but unfortunately, they were about to head into a wartime. So, and Chamberlain was not so effective on wartime because as Hitler rose to power finally, Hitler was starting to look around at a few things and start making his plans, and he started to do things right under everyone's noses, and people knew what he was doing, but they just kind of let it happen. Like Hitler started to, when he rose to power and was the fascist dictator, he started rebuilding Germany's military, and they weren't supposed to, and nobody said anything. No, they just kind of let him do it. They built up the Air Force again. Nobody said anything. They even put troops back in the Rhineland again, and no one said anything. There was no retaliation. Even the French soldiers, like you were saying, on those defense forts, they were kind of like, "Hey, they're there again, but we won't attack, though, right? We're not going to do this. Like, we're not going to actually do this, right?" Like, and they didn't. And for a long time, they didn't because they were like, well, we don't want to go to war again. We don't want another war, obviously. That's ridiculous. We'll just let Germany build back up what they did from before. Hopefully that means they're going to pay us back soon. Nope. Nope, they're not going to pay you back soon. Well, payback in some sense, I suppose.
And also just for understanding of how this is possible is they didn't pay for any of this. Germany just deficit financed their entire military.
Yeah. And bear in mind, there was actually a lot of aid from the United States to Germany after World War I.
Because they were screwed, and we were trying to help out, and then the Depression kind of stopped us from helping out. But what they really did is they took out basically loans around the world. Germany just owed all the banks a ton of money to make an army, and in the back of Hitler's head is, well, when we took over the world, we don't have to pay them back because they're our banks. That was the actual mentality. They were going to use plundered wealth to pay their debts.
That is pretty childish, to be honest.
Yeah.
It's gotta be my money anyway, so whatever. But that's what you get when you're a fascist dictator. And
they told the world, because you can find all the advertisements and stuff, that it was our metal industry. The iron mines of Germany are flowing heavier than ever. No, they weren't.
No, they're not. They're just taking everybody's money.
Yeah, they say that, but there's no iron miners to be found.
Hitler already not doing good here. So anyway, how does the action begin? Well,
also just to butt in again, because you did miss an allied power. It's very big and important, which is Chiang Kai-shek in China.
Oh, right. I also didn't talk about the Soviets, and I should.
Yeah.
But yeah, China too. That's right.
Chiang Kai-shek was not a popular figure, but he was the leader of Republican China, which was not a kingdom like Japan or an empire, whatever you want to say. They were a democratic nation.
Yeah, that's who I played in our Hearts of Iron game.
Yeah, and they had a very big army, but they were kind of similar to the Austrians in the First World War, where they had horses. They had very basic World War I guns. That's they were World War I armed. They were not ready for a huge conflict. And then, of course, Soviets were.
Yeah, and but the Soviets were, and so was Japan. So, but no, you're right. My bad. I do honestly. I always forget about China.
Yes, I was just gonna say everyone forgets about China when talking about the Allied powers, and it's very easy to. But
they get spanked. And
they don't, though. Is the thing they don't get spanked? They get pushed back, and then
one of the worst things that's ever happened.
No, very true. But it's always forgotten that China lasted the entire war. They never gave up. They were fighting the entire time. It's like France in the First World War. People were like, oh, they got pushed in. It's like, yeah, but they never stopped fighting the entire time. They were there strong.
That is true. Yes. And I'm not trying to shame or take away.
Yeah, stop being so offensive. I'm kidding.
Stop trying to make China look bad. No, I'm not.
Because people also always talk about how Soviets had so much manpower, but China had more. Even towards the end, they still had the manpower win.
If only they had the technology.
Yeah, basically, it would have changed so much. But anyway,
Yeah.
they made a bad deal with some neighbor.
Yeah, it's true.
Anyway, next.
So anyway, in Europe, the action gets started, and so Hitler, of course, is like, honestly, Hitler had this a very similar plan to take over the world as in World War I, which was just like, okay, in order to take out England and France, you have to go to France first, and I can't go fight the Soviets yet, so I'm not going to do that. So instead, he went to Stalin. Hitler went to Stalin, and was just kind of like, hey, let's work together on taking this here little country in between us, huh? What do you think? And I definitely definitely will attack you. I'm going to attack you later.
What was that thing you just said? What was that?
Yeah, exactly. And Stalin actually, fun fact on him, was actually kind of known a little bit more as a simpleton, as we know. Like, he wasn't necessarily a great, profound, intelligent man. He wasn't a literate, crazy, and like man of study and professor or university or lecturer. No, he was a working man. He was actually an everyman's man. He was very blue collar, and like, so, you know, he was slightly trusting in that way. And for whatever reason,
Well,
he's like, yeah, sure,
so Stalin opened the door, but also just so people can have a little understanding for a great name. The pact was a link between, I think his name is Joaquin. It's Joaquin Ribbentrop and then Vyacheslav Molotov. So if you ever want to know where the name Molotov comes from, it's this pact. The Molotov-Ribbentrop pact is what it's known as, which is Germany and USSR basically becoming allies.
Yeah, like early on in World War II, which is pretty funny.
Yeah, it's 39. I think this is 1936.
Yeah, even though Hitler took one look at Russia and was disgusted at what he saw.
Yeah,
like,
he visited and was like, ugh.
Yeah, it was like, did I sleep like this? But oh my god! And also, bear in mind, for those who don't know, there was a huge Jewish population in Russia.
Yes.
So, like, that was a big deal, and in Eastern Europe in general,
Mm-hmm.
and in Europe in general,
And in Germany in general.
and in Germany in general. Anyway, that's what, again, those are the parts of World War II I feel like here in the United States we know about a lot. So we won't, like, we'll talk about the Holocaust, obviously, but it's one of those things just kind of like we know what it was. Like, you know, the whole 9 yards of gas chambers and ovens and the terrible, terrible food conditions and everything like that. And it was the worst. And that was just Hitler's disgusting motivations was to not only the Jewish people, but also African Americans, cripples. Sorry, I just made people with disabilities. I just call them cripples. But sorry, that was like my brain goes to like the rhetoric. You know what I mean? Like, so that's why I said that. But like, no, like the disabled. He thought they were inferior. The Irish were inferior. Who else? Basically anything that wasn't like German or German adjacent.
Yeah.
Like, really.
Anything non-Aryan.
Yeah, exactly. So like, yeah.
Including
But
Italians. Moving on.
Oh yeah. Again, there's so many things about like this early allyship between the Axis powers that was never going to work to begin with. You know what I mean? Like Germany working with Italians and the Japanese. Are you fucking kidding me? Like, okay, dude, because you know Italy was once called the Great Roman Empire, and they still basically think of themselves that way. And then you have Japan, which is basically the same thing. Like,
yeah, and
know,
while
brutal.
It's a common misconception that Japan was part of the Axis, they were never part of the Axis, but they were allied with Germany, and they were given the status of honorary Aryan by Hitler, Japanese people. So to the Japanese people, the race of being Japanese, not any other kind of Asian, Japanese, was considered to be equal to Aryan by the German people. How long would that have lasted? Who knows? But that was a public declaration. So,
wow, what a weird. We don't have to talk about it now, but what a weird game of being like, well, Japanese. If you're Japanese, you get these points, and if you're Aryan, you get these points. And if you're
how
Chinese,
could that
you get
not be full of red flags as a German citizen who was following the Aryan rhetoric, and then hearing that, I'd be like, well, wait a second, but yesterday,
yeah, like it's like, but wait a minute. They look nothing like us.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's just like, yeah, exactly. So again, Hitler and all of his friends were basically shooting themselves in the kneecap long before like these things got started. Again, and I would take this on the ideology perspective of like when you have that type of ideology in your heart, when your heart is consumed by that type of evil. Because again, some people refer to this as the last war between good and evil. Like they really do.
Yeah.
Like, and if you don't want to be so dramatic, the last war between tolerance and
intolerance.
Intolerance. Like basically, it was that like Hitler basically snapped the ruler and said, "I've had enough. I'm taking it all." And everybody went, "We'd rather you didn't." Like, because again, at the end of the day, even if Germany, Italy, and Japan all won their battles and took over, Hitler would have to turn on Italy and Japan.
Mm-hmm.
He'd have to. Like, and at that point, who's going to fight for you? You have French soldiers, English soldiers, American soldiers. Like everyone's.
And it starts to show itself even during the war because I don't know if you're going to mention it, but as time goes on, Italy starts to go into danger.
Yep.
You'll notice the Italian soldiers aren't there. It's German soldiers.
Yeah. Oh, big time. No. Italy, I mean, Winston Churchill literally refers to Italy as its soft, the axis of soft underbelly because they are not that great and they weren't that strong. And Italy's defenses and military was, again, fairly weak and they were easily defeated. So, like, they went up through Africa and then
but
right
even
Italy.
Like the Battle of Monte Carlo, for example, there was more German than Italian troops.
Yeah.
It's just Hitler never trusted them to begin with.
No, he never did. Again, because he's a racist scumbag.
Yeah, he's like, they can't defend themselves. We're going to send our troops to defend it.
Although, to be fair to Mussolini, bear in mind, Mussolini was once a man of peace, and in wartime is when you see you don't know how gruesome war is until you sit in war. And at this time, war has begun. You know, like Hitler and Russia, or sorry, I shouldn't say Russia, the Soviet Union. They decided to take Poland, and they've been moving in that way together. So the war has begun, and Chamberlain, meanwhile, is just kind of like, "Hey, stop that! Stop that!" Stop that!
Can I say the famous Chamberlain quote?
Yes, go.
There will be no war this year, 1936. Neville Chamberlain.
Yeah. What did he
After his visit to Germany to tell them to stop.
Yeah, and then and Hitler was like, "Yeah, sure, we won't do it. We won't take."
Hitler's like, "Okay, we won't do it."
And then he did it. And then he immediately did it. And then Hitler turns around and is like, "Take Czechoslovakia. I'm gonna take you now.
You didn't give me a pinky promise, Mr. Chamberlain."
So then there goes Hitler, fucking scumbag of the scumbag of the day, just taking Czechoslovakia, and they're like, "Wait a minute!" But that means, of course, wartime. France and England declare war on Germany, and also this at the time too, like the Soviet Union's kind of going, wait a minute, what's going on here? Like, because at that point the Soviet Union's like, well, we agreed to help you take Poland, but
which was glossed over. So just to give that a little quick go over,
I did gloss over.
Hitler demands Danziger war. That's his famous quote. It's just 3 words. Danzig or war was his political statement to Poland. They said no, and then Russia and Germany just literally spit roast Poland, and it was very quick. It was the quickest war in modern history, and it was. I always give a lot of respect to the Polish defenders at that time for doing what they could with what they had. They're very famous for using lancers on horseback in their defense against these German machine guns and planes, and they held out pretty good for how unarmed they were.
Yeah.
But they didn't really also expect their former ally, the Germans, to do this to them, so they weren't ready.
Yeah. No, it was a pretty big betrayal, and that's the dramatic part that people usually point out the most when it comes to Poland and Germany. People, again, they don't bring up the Soviet Union usually helped them, and they usually always bring up the fact that it was such an egregious offense because of, like, it was just like they were friends once. Like, and it's true. And they had dramatic
and also those Polish jokes, that's like a common. Right. Even nowadays, people still make Polish jokes, and it all comes from this. This is where it comes from. Is their humiliating defeat at the hands of Germany and Russia, humiliating the fact it was so quick, but not in their lack of trying. They held on to the last man. They did not surrender until their army was defeated, and they did the best they could, but they got wiped out.
And it does suck being the first one in the war.
Also, the fact that Poles were
in.
considered even worse than Jews by many Nazis.
Yeah.
So it's not a good future for the people of Poland.
No, not at all. And again, like it's never good to go up to be the first battle in the war, and the first target, especially on like a very fresh Nazi military, German military,
Yeah.
And let's talk about the German hierarchy real quick for a second. So obviously you have Adolf, the big douchebag Hitler up at the top there, but he basically was the type of guy who surrounded himself with people of his own ideology. He was not typically one to like have people opposing to contrast his views to then stretch his thinking. He was very much just
everyone in his room had to believe his line.
Exactly. That and that was very, very important. And so everybody basically in the German military who gave orders, like for the most part, was basically part of that. Whereas a lot of the troops in infantry in the German military, they were just German military people. Like they didn't necessarily have a Nazi idealistic thing. And this is what a lot of Americans in particular don't like to talk about, is that like a lot of people who joined the Nazi army or the German military, as some of it would call it, were actually people from all over the world. And actually, there's a scene in Band of Brothers that actually goes over this really well, that I wanted to talk about too. But like, and so in the scene, there's an American soldier who's walking by a bunch of German POWs, and he's mocking them, and he's just kind of like, he's like, ha, where you from, kiddo? Ha, oh, far from here, blah, blah, blah. And one of them goes, he says, like, I'm from Denver, Colorado. One of the Nazi soldiers, one of the German troops says, I'm from, like, Denver. It wasn't Denver, but it was some fucking
It was Portland.
Place. Oh, it was Portland.
Yeah.
It was Portland.
Portland, Oregon, yeah.
Portland, Oregon. And then the soldier, the American soldier goes, wait, I'm from there, basically.
Because I'm from Eugene.
Yeah, I'm from Eugene. And then they start talking for a second, and he goes, why the fuck are you in a Kraut uniform? And he's just kind of like, well, my parents came from Germany, and when Germany went to war, they got called home to serve, and I had to go with them. And it's just, and then moments later, all those German POWs were mowed down. Just glossing over that.
There's another big point to make out. The Wehrmacht, which is the military force of Germany, was not a Nazi organization.
Yes.
At first, it became it as the war came on, because the SS, which is the Nazi military force, became permanently integrated with the German military during the invasion of Poland. And I think it was Manstein who was in charge of the military at that time, or at that attack. There's a famous story of him writing a letter back to Hitler, being super shocked and offended and upset that these SS soldiers are treating prisoners the way they are, and like executing prisoners and all this stuff like this. And then like the next day, his advisor, was assigned to him by Hitler directly as an SS officer, walked into Manstein's room with his letter in his hand, opened up, and said, if you try to send something like this again, you will no longer be seen by anyone. Basically saying you'll be disappeared. So keep your mouth shut until the party line.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, because that's again, like a lot of the people who served in the German military were just there because it was their job.
Yeah.
Like bear in mind, in this time too, there's a lot less to do. It was either you worked in a factory, you worked in the fields, or you were in the military.
Yep.
You know what I mean? It was like those were the jobs to do. There weren't a lot of entertaining jobs. There wasn't a lot of stay-at-home jobs. There weren't really a lot of office and, clinical and clerical jobs. And there were only handfuls of lawyers and doctors,
Mm-hmm.
or good ones, I should say. Again, a lot of people were just like, well, and for a simple life, you join the military, do 5 years in the military, 10 years in the military, get out, and then you're good for the rest of your life. Your country takes care of you. So a lot of people in the German military weren't at all Nazis and didn't necessarily share at all this ideology. And again, a lot of people too were called back to Germany, which is what makes this so sad too, is that like a lot of people who were fighting this for this man like weren't necessarily on the same side as this man, but they were way too afraid to dissent, because like you suggested, it's just like if you disagreed with that ideology, they'd come in and be like, if you disagree again, we'll just kill you and throw you in a river.
Yeah, there's also a common a good example of this is the amount of Polish people that joined the Nazi army and you can look it up. There's a pin that they would wear on their collar that was a red and white pin to indicate they were Polish, and it meant they couldn't obtain certain ranks and they got treated a certain way. But the biggest thing about that, which a lot of them didn't know, is they were sent off to fight on the front lines in France or whatever, or Russia, and they had no idea what was happening to their families at home in Poland.
Right. Like, yeah, which is... So basically they were... So they were fighting for people who hate them while their families
were being probably killed by them. Yes, that's exactly what was happening. Yeah,
slaughtered, raped, steal. Yeah, exactly. So, like, again, when I say that, I cannot emphasize this enough. One of the calling this is like the last war between good and evil is a very, very apt name, because these people, again, they were trying everything they could to purify, quote unquote, the world, and it is like. And it was devastating, and so at this time though, France and the UK had no choice but to jump into the war. They had to fight now because they were like, all right, you're taking Czechoslovakia and Poland, and again, even the Soviet Union now was going like, hey, what the fuck are you doing? Not Germany. What the hell is this? What is this shit? You know what I mean? So even the Soviet Union was starting to think twice about their former partnership with Germany. Although again, Hitler being Hitler, he may have promised to not attack Stalin, but he didn't mean it.
Yeah. Oops.
He didn't.
You didn't touch my pinky.
He didn't touch it. So actually, and you mentioned this earlier, that Germany had a lot of propaganda and was bragging about how their iron mines were bustling and bumping, but they were actually getting a lot of iron from the Slavic states, like I believe it was like Norway and like Switzerland and stuff like that, and like Sweden maybe, or Finland,
Scandinavian states.
That's the one, Scandinavia.
They were getting a lot of iron as well from their good friend Stalin, because they had a lot more iron than Germany did.
Oh, sure did. But Chamberlain saw this, by the way. So this is the reason why this is important, because he saw this going on. He's like, wait a minute, like they're getting iron from them. So Chamberlain tried to take the diplomatic approach before doing anything. It was just like, hey, my friends up north, could you guys stop? And they were like, nah, because they were making money, and they were all fairly neutral in the war. So they were just like, we're making money for it, until they weren't neutral, because England then placed like sea mines basically in all the harbors outside of the northern shorelines in those areas, and so it stopped Germany's trade. And Hitler noticed that immediately and retaliated. And so then the war got brought up there too, to like Norway and stuff like that. Like there was like literally fighting up there. And then Chamberlain. That's when Chamberlain resigned. Was after that, because it was like a semi-embarrassing defeat. It wasn't like the worst embarrassing defeat, but like. It was a good attempted idea. Attacking trade routes and trying to shut those down diplomatically and by way of blockade is fine. It just failed because you're against the Nazis, and Hitler saw it and was like, oh, I'm going to get you, and he got him. And so then Chamberlain resigns, and who follows up? Mr. Peace Signs himself, motherfucker, Winston Churchill.
The Bulldog.
Oh, boy, and was he. Like, oh, my God. Shit. You love Winston Churchill as a storied man, but you hate him if you knew him. Like, is basically a lot of the history of Winston Churchill.
He is what the world needed at that time.
Oh, I would argue that he is one of the entire reasons the Allies.
100%. Churchill is
attitude. Yeah.
Churchill. It can be. You can look at him under a lens and he is the stereotypical old white dude.
Yeah,
like in every way, he's not chill. Like he is, he has some very right wing. He's very, very right wing. But during this time period, that's what the world needed to win this thing.
And to Churchill's credit, he didn't like a lot of people, but he believed in their at least right to be a sovereign in themselves. Mm-hmm. He did believe in that, which is like, I don't give a shit. And this is as an American. I'm a left leaning American boy for sure. Like, but like. I don't give a shit what your ideology is. The second you say, "But you do you," I'm
that's
cool
it. That's huge points. Yeah,
it's huge points. Like you can be like, "Oh, I'm like an anti-abortion." Like I'm not. Well, maybe some of this stuff's a little much, but like maybe not.
Basically, just the idea of looking at someone and saying, "I really disagree with what you're doing and the way you are, but I'm not going to stop you." Like, go on. you know.
Yeah, exactly. And that was Winston Churchill, as opposed to
as opposed to his counterpart Adolf Hitler.
Exactly. Like they're the great two leaders to really compare to each other, because they're both undesirable scumbags in their own rights. Like, again, if you knew him personally, his family, like, he was at work all the time. They were like, we know you, kinda. Like,
yeah, a lot of people also look at World War II and when they think of the two biggest leaders, usually a lot of people think of FDR and Adolf, but I always think Churchill first.
I do too.
Churchill is such a bigger he's so much a bigger force in this war.
Oh yeah, because and FDR was great, but FDR was super helpful second half of the war.
Yeah,
like that's where FDR really helped, was second half. But like, again, after Chamberlain showed that he could not handle wartime stuff after his poor attempt at stopping iron reserves flowing into Germany by way of the north, he's resigned. Churchill takes over, and so everyone's. Everything's getting spicy, and for a couple of years, again, there's actually, or I don't know if it was years, but for a time there was actually a little bit of nothing going on. There was a little bit of no fighting, but there were German soldiers and French soldiers and English soldiers basically staring each other down on the French border in the Rhinelands. They're just fucking. No one's shooting though. No one's shooting anybody. And they were like, well, we're not going to.
There was a couple of German attempts. German attempted the march. They touched the march on a few times. It got absolutely destroyed.
Yeah. And then, but then Germany did what they went and through a little bit towards the north, and this is how they started it, through Belgium. And when they started to attack Belgium, because they would tell you, but when they made it an actual attack, a real effective military attack, was when they went under the north and went to attack Belgium, and that forced France and the UK up north to try to head them off. Meanwhile, Germany takes a massive fucking force, and basically kind of similar to where they did in Verdun in World War I, punched, but this time the force was just overwhelmingly, it didn't matter, punched a massive hole into France through the Rhinelands down south, and all the way completely surrounding the French and English troops.
So just to not to get way too specific, else we'd be here forever, but a big reason as to why that happened without British intervention is because in this time period that we were talking about where not a lot happened, what did happen literally right before this, like a month before the attack on Belgium, Germany annexed Norway, and Norway became German, and Britain attacked Norway. Yes. So Britain had their hands full in Norway. Yeah.
And this is I think this is what we were talking about with Chamberlain too. This is like when he resigned, is because he was like, because that was his great embarrassment and failure when Churchill took over, was his attempt.
But when Belgium was going on, the attack in Norway was still going. There was still a Norwegian front, and soldiers were going on. Which, if you ever played Battlefield 5, that was actually that's like the only thing I've ever seen in media show that war, the Norwegian side.
Interesting. Anyway, so okay, where was I? So we have Germany taking Belgium, and then Germany also punches down through the Rhinelands into France and completely has and annihilates the French army. And now the rest of the English army is basically on the back foot trying to retreat, and they do thankfully get rescued from the people at Dunkirk. Which there was actually a movie, and it was really good.
Very good movie.
Very good movie.
Required watching. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah. After this, go watch Dunkirk. It's very good. But it was a fucking phenomenal story. Honestly, but that was like, some would argue, and when it comes to morale, that was the first like big morale boost for the the
Allies.
UK and Allies.
Yeah, even though it was kind of a defeat, it was also a success in itself.
It was a huge defeat. It was a huge defeat because, like, again, France lost the bulk of their military. Not everything. France continued, like you mentioned before. France continued to fight. They lost their main power, and and Germany was
they lost
driving
France.
around. They lost France, but they were in there.
Yeah, and also just to get into that for a second, it was 13 days. That's how long it took for Germany to take out France. And that was the second Blitzkrieg, led by Rommel. Yep. That's where Rommel's troops earned the title Ghost Division, because by the time the French soldiers would arrive to meet them, they were gone already and behind them. So they said it was like fighting ghosts because they were never there. And the way they achieved this is the drivers of these tanks and jeeps would be going full speed. They would be pouring gas into the engine as it was going full speed. They would be doing lots of coke. Like a lot of coke was done by the German soldiers to keep them awake and keep them able to fight.
Well, that's actually something we could talk about. Like, amphetamines were huge in the German military, including Adolf himself.
Yeah.
Like, yeah. But anyway. But but a lot of the German military occupied France was around the edges and borders. So, like, a lot of French resistance could happen within the cities and within, like, urban areas, because mostly it was just like secret police, stormtrooper types in France, like, you know, as opposed to straight up like legions of no platoons necessarily were walking around all the time like German platoons, so they could continue to resist there. But that also meant that all the territories that France had, especially in Africa, were now occupied by Germany too. So there was a lot less land that the Allies could walk through in Africa on their approach. And we can talk a little bit about the Africa.
I pulled up a picture of France after the war, because a lot of people also don't understand how this worked. France got cut in half, and northern France was Germany. It was part of the German Empire at the time. The Third Reich. And then the bottom part was known as Vichy France. Which this map is actually kind of confusing because it says free zone. It wasn't free at all.
Yeah.
Vichy France was France governed by the French leftovers of the military, controlled by the leftovers of the French military, who were fascist. They were a fascist-controlled France, puppet state of Germany. And what happened was, like we mentioned, Dunkirk. They fled to northern Britain, or southern Britain, and then a lot of them also fled to Africa. Where there was where de Gaulle actually was known often as the leader of Free France during the war.
Neat. I love it. And also there was a lot of, if I'm not mistaken, the UK had a lot of action going on in Africa.
Oh yeah, that would be after this. So Germany never took Africa because of de Gaulle. Charles de Gaulle, the French military leader, fled south instead of north and went to Africa, and he controlled the French legions in Africa and held off the Germans for the British to arrive and support them, and later the Americans.
Right. Oh, man, so good. So anyway, but this is like, so right now, by the way, especially looking at this map, it's the perfect map to have up. Hitler's feeling good. Ooh, Hitler's feeling real good. He's just like, I just took France in a way that my predecessors in World War I couldn't even dream of. I made the UK look stupid, though the UK, by the way, meanwhile, not budging. They got their troops back from Dunkirk, and they stick in the mud, baby. You gotta give the people of Great Britain and England and everything some credit for being some of the most stubborn motherfuckers on the entire planet.
Oh yeah,
because boy howdy, did they just not at all. They never gave in, and that's when a lot of credit goes to Winston Churchill on that. For some of the things that he said and some of the decisions that he made. He actually, in order to make a rescue at Dunkirk, he had to sacrifice a division of like English troops just to make it happen, basically. And he literally sent them pamphlets that said, "Hey, just a heads up, we're gonna rescue everybody at the beaches of Dunkirk, but not you guys. You're all gonna die gloriously for the United Kingdom. Okay, thanks, bye." And and they got wiped out. From what I understand, they all got wiped out by Germans. Like, they got basically artillery fucked into hell. And but it was a decision that needed to be made in order to distract the German military long enough to get the people out of Dunkirk. So it was one of those things that it was one of those decisions.
And I brought up a bigger map of this is Europe in 1940.
Yeah. By the way, I just can't help but taking a joke break for a second. Look at that cock and balls.
Oh.
Just that white cock and balls there, right
in
the middle.
Also that white cock and balls. I was just going to bring it up because we also didn't mention that in 1939. Yeah. The Finns beat the Russians.
That's right. The Finns were fighting the Russians. That's actually one of the reasons why, if I'm not mistaken, Chamberlain thought it was a good idea to go north.
Yeah.
Was because he was like, oh, Russia's occupied by Finland. I forgot to mention that. So yeah.
Yeah, Soviets attacked Finland. Nothing. They lost.
It's like probably why I forgot to mention it.
It's just like they thought Finland would be a pushover, and the Russians got screwed. And it's the first white peace of the war. They literally came to white peace. They just went. They're like, let's stop, and they're both like, okay. And it was also during this time that Finland would receive a international reputation that lasts to this day, unfortunately for them, where the reason they won is because they said, hey, Germany, give us guns. And Germany's like, okay. So they had a lot of German, no troops, but weapon backup. So the Finns themselves were able to defend the Soviets, to stop the Red Tide from taking them over with the help of the Germans. While they'd never officially joined the Axis, many people in Europe specifically, if there's any Europeans in chat, you can probably back this up, they like to call them Nazis.
Oh, I've heard these things too.
It didn't help that they had a swastika as their military logo until like last year. But whatever. Moving on, back to 1940.
Again, Hitler's feeling good. He's like, motherfucker, took France. I got Belgium. I got Poland, Czechoslovakia. Look at this map. Look at this blue map. That is mine. You know, he's ruling it with an iron fist. He's a scumbag, killing minorities and other people and people he finds inferior, and anybody who just has any disagreement with him. If you liked the purple drapes instead of the maroon ones, he's gonna shoot you. You know, that's basically Hitler at this point. But yet, what's his irritation? Well, we were talking about him, singing his praises earlier. That old Winston Churchill, that motherfucker that fat fuck won't seem to bend. Like, why won't this guy stop the war? Why won't he surrender? I have a way better Air Force than he does. I'm dropping bombs. I'm bombing the shit out of I'm London and other places in England. I'm bombing the shit out of the UK. Why won't you give up? Why won't you give up? And then Winston Churchill sends a small, basically insignificant bombing raid over Berlin that pissed off Hitler so much. He got so fucking mad. Was that like he started to take his troops and make this is when, you know, the good military intelligent commanders' plans started going off the rails, because at this point he was expecting to, you know, them to start caving, but they weren't. And at this point too, Japan. Oh, I forgot. We haven't talked about what's going on. Meanwhile, on the other side.
Yeah.
So meanwhile, keep in mind, there's a huge power we basically haven't talked about this entire time yet that hasn't been involved in the war. Who's that, Atlas?
China and Japan.
No. The United States.
No.
No. So anyway, meanwhile, the United States is sitting there being like, oh, should we get involved? No. Should we get involved? No. Should we get involved? No. Because there's a lot of actually so at this time, the United States was coming off of the Great Depression. So one of the things that the United States is interested in the most, and this is just true on an economic level, is trade with a lot of people. And we were trading with the UK, we were trading with France, sure, whatever, but we were kind of also trading with Germany. In fact, we had quite a few, and there's actually pictures of famous Nazi rallies being held in New York City. But this was before the war, obviously. This is not during this time. But because at this point, the United States was like, whoa, no, not supporting what was going on there anymore. But there were a lot of economic incentives for the United States to try to be friends with everybody. And again, as we mentioned earlier, the United States was big time influencing Japan and trying to force trade with Japan. And that bubbled up to the point where Japan was getting a little sick and tired of shit, and they wanted to take over all those colonies back down in the south again. They wanted to make sure they had all their islands, and they didn't like how the United States and the UK had a bunch of islands in the south. So what did they do? Well, in December of... What month was it? What year was it again? I can't believe I forget.
Are you talking about what... Are we going to 1942?
Yeah.
Okay, so before that, I just brought up a map of this whole time China has been getting heavily attacked by Japan.
Yes. Red zones, baby.
So you can see this. You can see South Korea and North Korea are marked on this map. This is a modern map drawn with the World War II stuff over it, which I like.
Thailand became basically Japan.
Yeah.
They got totally fucked.
That's a whole other kind of power, actually.
Yeah.
So there's Japan, and then there's North Korea and South Korea, which was owned by them. And then north of that was another Chinese puppet state before the war, which we didn't talk about, called Manchuria. And Manchuria is just northern China, where Beijing is. And this area is where actually the kicked out and exiled Qing dynasty ran to.
No shit.
And they ruled over Manchuria. It's a legitimate imperial Chinese line was now under the control of Japan, and they decided to help Japan willingly because they like the idea of an empire. Yeah. They wanted to restore. So their treaty basically was, let's attack China and we'll let you become the Chinese Empire again. And so they attacked China. This red line on the side.
Yeah.
Wouldn't move for the rest of the war. Basically, it would go in and out a little bit, but that's where China held for the whole time. They desperately tried. There was an event, you can look it up. It's called the Rape of Nanjing. Yep. And this was the Nanjing province in China, where it shows the brutality of the Japanese being just as bad as the Germans during this, which is something not to forget. Japan was evil during this time. Extremely evil. Japan was.
We were talking about the isolationists.
Yeah, this Imperial Japan was a very different place. They were horrible. They thought of the Chinese just like how the Germans thought of the Jewish people. It was exactly the same. Mass executions, mass rapes, which is what's known for. There was famous stories of them lining up women in villages in the streets while the soldiers would rape them, and then once they were done, they would just have their heads removed. And then just left there. So that's where the name Rape of Nanjing comes from, because that's literally events that happened in Nanjing, China. And China was on the Allies at this time, too. They were getting help from the British. They were getting help from... Because the British still controlled Hong Kong, mind you. So the British were down here. And if you don't know the map, it's below China. It's the kind of little dot below China. So they were giving them supplies and stuff. They controlled that. British also controlled Malaysia, and they also controlled Thailand. And they started during this time to quickly... They were trying to... We haven't got there yet, but they're soon to start losing a lot of land. It's actually, no, I guess it is around this time, 1940, 1941, where this map is, that Thailand kind of gets taken over by the Japanese, and the rise of another Asian power, Siam. And Siam doesn't exist nowadays. You may have heard the term Siamese.
Yep.
Which Siam is the clandestine rule of Southern Asia, basically, that doesn't exist. It's not really a nation. It's just like a lot of people. It's an ancient nation. And nowadays, including World War II, kind of existed as just an idea of a fascist Southern Asian power. And together with Japan, they formed their own axis known as the Co-Prosperity. I think the Pacific Co-Prosperity Sphere is what they're called.
Yeah, it was like basically like, what was it? Thailand, Cambodia, Vietnam, like...
Yeah, it's Laos, Burma, Vietnam, all these countries down here, meeting up with India, declared themselves as Siam, had a fascist ruler. It was all under Japanese dictate. They put the people in charge, you know.
Right, yeah. Again, they ruled the whole thing.
Yeah. It's very similar to Germany and Italy. It's just happening again in Asia, and no one talks about it outside of Asia in history. So it's just we don't know about.
We're so, like, I feel like, for whatever reason, people feel so much more connected to the European front in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
So, but we don't, because, like, again, this is the history that I wanted to make sure that we talked about, because people don't know, like, why it's really called World War II. It's just like, well, really, it was just Germany and Japan trying to take over. It's just like, you don't understand to the extent to which they touched, like, where it was, like, it was in Africa, it was in Asia, it was in Europe, it was in, like,
not
everywhere.
Not world power, but another nation to point out this time is India. Was called the British Raj at the time. And the British Raj, they were under control of Britain, but they were a huge fighting force around the world. They were in Italy. They were a huge force in Italy offensive. They were big in Asia, especially in like the defense of Thailand and stuff. There was tons of Indian soldiers.
Yeah, that's right. And that, again, that's why it's called World War, because everybody was affected by it. And if you weren't affected by it in a way of actually fighting in the war by shooting bullets, you were probably affected by it economically, because wartime is always poverty time. Like, it brings about riches usually later on, well, if you're the winner.
Yeah.
But you know, during wars, it always costs the people. And I mean, hell, we know that we've basically been in war since I was a kid. So
Yeah.
like we finally just ended the Afghanistan war, which was a humiliating, stupid war that we should have ended a long time or whatever. Anyway, but that's neither here nor there. But like the whole point is that like again, talking about the theme that we're talking about, this is the last war of good and evil, where these ideas of genuine superiority that Germany and Japan had were being put on display here. Like, this is why, you know, pride is such a sin. You know what I mean? And I hate to say, and I'm not trying to sound biblical here by saying it's a sin, but like,
well, this is what happens when people using pride as their motivator take the world in their reins.
Exactly. Like this is the extent of pride. Like the people, like the Japanese soldiers, like you were saying, they were raping and beheading women like crazy all over the place. What could lead a person to do something like that? Well, thinking that there's literally nothing wrong at all with what you're doing, and getting the okay and the nod by your leaders and the people you look up to your entire life. And when you're an isolationist country like Japan is for 200 fucking years, and then the first real experience that you have with the outside world is kind of unfair and you're being fucked over, yeah, you're gonna snap.
Also, there's a Japanese general who had a quote. I can't remember what it was exactly, but the base of the quote is, "We are not murdering the Chinese because murder would imply they're human."
Exactly. Yeah.
So they thought of the Chinese animals. They didn't even think they were people. So that's what, and they drilled that into the mindset of their soldiers, which allowed their soldiers to do unspeakable acts to the Chinese.
Yeah, and like there's something, and we were kind of talking about this. Like, here's a huge difference between the Japanese military and the German or Nazi military. We were talking about how the Nazi military kind of started off as two different militaries, the SS and then the regular German force, I forget what they're called. And then eventually they fused into one because Hitler is a psychopath.
It was known as the Waffen SS, I believe, within the Wehrmacht were the two military forces.
Wehrmacht, correct. Yeah. The Wehrmacht were like, I don't want to say the good guys.
They were the same. They were the same military from the German Empire in World War One. Same people.
Yeah, just yeah, exactly, and not necessarily Nazis. Again, cannot drive that home. So if you think about the morale of the German soldier in World War II, you can think about a good chunk of that was them going, I don't really believe in what I'm fighting for. I'm just fighting for fear. The Japanese had a very very different point of view. The Japanese military were fought from fear and pride. It was one of those two things. You fought to the death. If you were part of the Japanese military, you fought to the death. They did not believe in taking prisoners, and they did not believe in being taken prisoner. So like they were fucking the Imperials were absolutely brutal. Bear in mind too, in the United States, we had Japanese people who lived here, and we did not treat them very well. I want to point out, but that's like and which is really sad because a lot of these Japanese people were trying to escape that type of oppression.
Yep.
You know what I mean? And they were literally trying to get out of that horrible, like, you're either a tool to Japan or you're dead. Like, they wanted to get away from that, and they came to the United States, and then Pearl Harbor happened, which is what we're about to talk about. And then everyone was just kind of like, fuck you, Japan, Japanese people. It's like, oh, no. And then internment camps.
Let's just, before we get deep into that, let's just go over Pearl Harbor.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we need to get there, yeah. So eventually, like we said, Japan was finally looking to expand more south. They wanted all these islands, and but they knew that the only way they could do that is if they, they knew if they started taking the small islands that the U.S. Navy was just going to go, no, and then sail over there and take them. So instead, they decided to try to cut the head off the beast and go right for the U.S. Navy. And boy, did they, because Pearl Harbor was and is obviously in American history to this day one of the worst attacks on American soil that's ever taken place. And it is truly, and it really is fucked up. Like, it is something that is, again, like on a display of what is like, oh, it's just like, it's good and evil. Again, it's like I'm not saying that every American troop that was sitting in Pearl Harbor had an altruistic heart and a good person, but what the Japanese were doing were like sacrificing even themselves for the sake of just this one ideology of Japanese supremacy. They were taking their planes and smashing them into the sides of these aircraft carriers and battleships and blowing themselves up just to kill people and just not, by the way, people always like, oh, they attacked all the ships. They also attacked like the shorelines too.
So there was a great, it was a fucked up attack, but there was great strategic purpose to it. They attacked Pearl Harbor specifically aiming for the ships in dock to stop the American Navy, like you said, from ruling the Pacific Ocean, because we were the biggest Navy at the time. Yep. And they did it, and of course they also wanted to make sure we wouldn't be able to repair these ships quickly, so they took out the shoreline as well. The biggest thing that's fucked up about it is this is what a surprise war is known as. They did not declare war on us. They just bombed Pearl Harbor. We declared war on them immediately after. And there's Pearl Harbor, we could do an entire episode on it. We may very well might, actually. I might do that. But it happened because of American negligence as well. There was a submarine that went into a Japanese submarine was detected. And they just said, "Oh, don't worry about it." Yeah. And that Japanese submarine gave the ships the coordinates of where to strike. Like that was the whole. It gets way deeper than that. But like, there's just
well, there's a lot of American negligence is famous. Like 9/11 has American negligence all over it.
Also, because we were at that time we were trading with Japan, and we didn't think they would attack. We didn't like. No. There's a lot you could go into about like did we know what's happening and all the conspiracy theories and everything, but generally it's just like even if we knew it was coming and we picked them up on the radar, it's like we were never 100% sure Pearl Harbor was going to get hit. Like they could just be making a front line in the ocean. Like we don't know.
Yeah. Also, to the extent that it got hit, how they got hit, and again, like the way no one was expecting like kamikaze. Like you know what I mean? No one was expecting.
And also just like. To continue going ahead as well, Pearl Harbor was a huge success for Japan. Massive success.
Huge success for Japan.
And it worked. It worked. Everything they wanted to happen. America got fucked. Like we got completely wrecked in the Pacific at Pearl Harbor.
Yeah, it was bad. And like, I mean, again, like this nation of like isolationists and superiority. You know what I mean? And like, so then they want to try to take over all of these islands, and then after this, but America at that point. Keep in mind, Japan didn't give a shit about formalities. So, like, the idea of, like you kind of mentioned it, like the idea of, quote-unquote, declaring war, that's a strategic disadvantage. Why would you do that? Why would you say to somebody, I'm going to go to war with you? Why wouldn't you just blow the shit out of them? That's what Japan did. Japan was like, I'm not going to tell you. I'm just going to do it. Like, ironically, that was genius. Like, it's unsettling. It is
well, of course it's genius. Because the whole reason you declare war is for humanitarian purposes. Like you declare war because you're going to attack and do something extremely non-humanitarian, of course, but you can get civilians out, that kind of thing. Yeah, there was never a chance for that with Pearl Harbor.
Exactly, and because Japan doesn't give a shit. Because again, the same way they look at China, again, they had that superiority. They looked at us the same way. They're like, oh, these American fucking pigs, American dogs. You know what I mean? Like these fucking, who gives a shit? Like who cares about them? And like, well, kill them. It doesn't matter. Like they're just one more. Stepping stone on the greater path to Japanese supremacy. That was like basically how they felt. So like, again, the idea of declaring war made no sense to them. You know, it doesn't. Yeah,
and also just to go into the aftermath, so we can keep progressing forward again. One major thing that happened as a result is Australia had to step up their game heavily. Yep, because they were the allied naval power. What here was Australia, and it wasn't the big navy. The British Navy were being way too held up in Europe, so they could only send a few ships. They did. They did send support. The British had Hong Kong. They had other islands out here as well. But Australia kind of led the way, and they were getting completely destroyed by Japan. Japanese naval power was dominating. We lost the entirety of what we were just talking about with Siam. That got completely lost. All of South Asia got taken by the Japanese. They started pushing into Malaysia. They started pushing right above. They were right above Australia, and America started rebuilding their military, their navy at this time too, and started pushing out. But there was two things that I think are hilarious to this. So that was big for Japan. They were booming forward, and Japan made this big statement talking about how like they made a public statement saying like they're the owners of the Pacific, and it's like their divine right to like follow the divine winds or whatever they said, some quote like that. And at the same time, Hirohito, Emperor of Japan, gets a very strongly worded from Hitler, basically saying, "What the fuck did you just do?" And the famous quote from his letter is, "You just woke a sleeping giant."
Oh my god.
Which is America, because it was the worst decision of the entire war to attack Pearl Harbor.
Yes, it was, because again, we barely talked about the United States involvement this entire time, and that's for a reason, because we're American, and a lot of us know Americans' history, America's involvement in World War II. In fact, I'd argue that we probably know more about that than anything else. So, but it isn't. But after talking an hour about what's going on in Europe and Asia, it really speaks to what America did. And why, like we said this, I think on an episode last time. It's like, it's okay to be proud of our win in World War II.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if you are proud of the United States and their victory in World War II, good, you should be. If you're disappointed that we fought in a war, fuck you. Like, we helped save millions of people.
Yes.
Like, I mean, some could argue we should have gotten in sooner. Whatever, fine. That's not the point. This was the battle of good and evil, and we felt it. Straightforward. Because that's what I think that a lot of this is just a very human nature thing in general, is that oftentimes people won't get involved in something until they're personally affected. And when Pearl Harbor happened, that was obviously very personal to the United States. So then, like, that was it. It was over for them. It was just like, at that point, because Japan didn't expect us to rebuild as quick as we did. They didn't expect us to retaliate as quick as we did. And they sure as hell didn't expect what was going to happen a couple of years later.
And also, guess who was in a meeting in Washington, D.C. a week after the attack? Winston Churchill.
Oh. I didn't know that.
Already. He was like, let's go. Like, he knew it was coming.
He's like, let's do it, dude. He's like, all right, time to get in.
Yep, there was a huge meeting with Stalin, FDR, and what's her name? Churchill. Because also during this time, which we also didn't say, is this is when the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact was broken.
Oh, yeah.
And right before the attack on Pearl Harbor, Hitler attacked Russia. And there was a huge Russian front, and the Russians were losing bad. They were getting destroyed by Germany. And the world was scared because Russia was seen as this kind of like God as well, and they were just being taken out. And so so after this happened, he was also, that's why this was the big meeting, the three major allies, the Soviets, America, and the UK. And basically all that actually happened of that meeting, for the record, is that the UK and America agreed to send an assload of guns and planes and tanks to the Russians. So we armed the Russians heavily to fight back.
Well, we needed to, because they had fucking nothing.
Yeah, they're famous for having nothing. You know, even after this, like we gave them a lot of stuff, but they had too many men. They had way too much manpower for us to handle.
Yeah. This is a common thing: is that everybody knew that to one gun there were two soldiers. One soldier had the gun, one soldier had a clip, and if the soldier with the gun was killed, the other soldier would just pick up the gun and continue on. And if the soldier with the clip was killed, the soldier would just pick up the clip and continue on.
That's a big deal for why Hitler was so pissed off at Pearl Harbor, because he basically knew that was the end. Like, if America attacks him from the west, the Eastern Front is finished. Yeah, because, exactly. Because Hitler knew that it was going to take almost all of his power to take Russia. And that's why he was just like, okay, then this has to be a delicate operation, has to be done quickly. But also, Hitler underestimated one other thing about Russia, is the winters. So, when it took a little bit extra long to get in there, winter hit. And his troops were not ready for it. However, Stalin had literally Siberian troops that were trained for special sub-zero ops that came to the front lines, and then they were wild effective against the Nazi invaders during the wintertime. And so and at that point, this is when Hitler started to have, he was no longer partying about his victories in France. You know what I mean? He was now having panic attacks because he's like, well, one ally over in the Far East went fucking balls crazy and decided to blow up Pearl Harbor, and now the biggest country in the world, and next to the other biggest country in the world that I'm already fighting, is now going to fight me.
Yeah, exactly. So it's just it's at that point it was all about The only way Germany could have lasted at this point was if he genuinely pulled everything out of Russia, but he did not do that. And that was like one of his biggest mistakes, is he should have pulled everything out of Russia and then sat and defended what he had taken, but he did not do that.
Yeah.
Because there was another invasion being planned to take back what was once France's. And that is one of the most famous battles of all time, called D-Day.
Well, also,
we'll get to that in a second.
Yeah, I was gonna say before that, Africa.
Before that.
While we're talking about this, Africa
right?
was
yeah,
also going
right.
down.
Sorry, I totally forgot about.
Yeah,
that's
this
right.
was El Alamein, the famous battle of Africa, where the Desert Fox was going against, I think it's Montgomery, the British commander in Africa, and the German Africa Corps were led by Rommel, the Desert Fox, and they were the biggest use of armor in the war yet was taking place there.
Right. Yes. Actually, I remember there was a Call of Duty game, Call of Duty Big Red 1, that was like, it was a World War II one, and that you had to actually do a lot of artillery in Africa in that game. And I always thought that was amazing, because I had no idea all that stuff happened until I played that game. And then I learned all about like the African front. And I was like, this is fucking crazy.
Yeah. Well, Rommel that should be a whole Lord Lords. Maybe it will be, because he is a crazy general. He was the best probably general in the entire war on both sides. Was Urban Rommel. He was extremely vocally anti-Hitler and anti-Nazi as well, and one of the biggest proponents of Operation Valkyrie, which was the attempted murder of Hitler from within.
Yeah.
He never got caught until after his death that he was part of it, but we know he was a big part of it, and he was just a brilliant strategist, and he only lost the battle in Africa because of which a lot of people, including myself, kind of attribute to the loss of Germany, which is where it started. An African campaign is they ran out of gas. Huh. They couldn't fuel their tanks, and so they kept getting smaller tanks, and then before you know it, he was getting tanks made by Fiat to fight these new and fancy British Crusader tanks, which were able to go faster than almost any car at the time in the desert.
Insane.
And it was just he was losing men, and even with all his losses, he managed to push the British to their limit. Like, he was extremely good. He outsmarted almost every single one of the British movements, but eventually he was just outgunned and lost. And when he lost was, again, this is before D-Day. When he lost, he got wounded in battle and treated Germany. He ended up dying in 1944 due to his wounds. He'll never be part of the war again. But this opened up the way for the British invasion into Italy. And the Battle of Monte Carlo. Yeah, so a lot of American troops. This was the first American battle in the war in Europe. They'd already been fighting in Japan, or in the Pacific, but in Europe,
yes,
the American troops coalitioned with the British and the Indian troops attacked Italy, while the British alone attacked Greece.
Right, I forgot about British attacking Greece.
Yeah,
actually,
it was, those are big battles that also took place. British successfully were able to hold Greek, it was literally for nothing but distraction, to make sure the Greek soldiers, the Greek defense wasn't able to go into Italy, and it worked.
Yep, I mean, that was, and you mentioned it earlier too. Like, Hitler had no trust in Mussolini's forces in Italy, so he basically sent his own forces down there to help defend. Which
also something
way thinner,
which I didn't really mention as well is one of the reasons why they were all those Italian troops that we're talking we didn't trust were sent to be fodder for Rommel in Africa, and they're all dead. They're all dead at this point, so there's no Italian army, basically. It's gone.
Way to go, Hitler.
All the Italian armor and troops were killed in Africa.
So that basically, right there, there is no more ally to Germany. Like, Italy is a puppet ally.
Italy was their navy, and they were very good. Italian navy was very good. They were the only successful Italian part of the war. Up until this point, the British and American ships started showing up in the Mediterranean, and they just got destroyed. One of the biggest reasons they ran out of gas and equipment in Africa is because British and American submarines sinking the convoys, the Italian convoys, and sinking tanks. There's still to this day so many German Panzer IV tanks at the bottom of the Mediterranean Ocean.
It's pretty fucking wild.
Because they just sunk them by the hundreds, and they would never. Rommel never got his tanks. Sometimes they would let Italian tanks through because they knew they were trashy, and he knew he would have to use them. And it's a mind game of screwing the supply routes.
Yeah, no, that's really good. That's pretty good. Sorry, Rommel. I know you didn't like the Nazis, but so at this point too, like Hitler's starting to feel a lot of heat because again, America's in full force now. We have fresh bodies, baby. We haven't been fighting. We're not like France, who's got like residual forces everywhere and they're exhausted. We're not the UK, which has basically been trying to stonewall these motherfuckers for the last few years. Like, no, we're fresh and ready and eager to go. So we start planning basically the recapture of Europe. Because so when we went into Europe or Italy from the south, it wasn't necessarily it did become part of the operation to recapture Europe through France, but then it was planned out to eventually just drop over into D-Day, and that's basically like what people remember as, at least on the European front, the U.S.'s big like involvement and how we totally shifted it. And yeah, I would say so. I would agree. Like, I think that it's very easy to say that D-Day was one of the like craziest fucking operations that worked with a lot of accidents. There were so many accidents and miscommunications and bad, like, because part of the D-Day operation was, and they actually do this, they go over this in Band of Brothers, is the paratroopers the night before. So June 4th, 1944 was D-Day, and that morning, as everybody remembers, like them landing on the beaches and stuff. But the night before, they actually had paratroopers landing all over in France to try to cut the supply lines between the beaches and the rest of the German forces. So that way, like, when they landed on the beaches, Germany had what they had, and when they were done, they were done. Like, there was basically, like, it was basically saying, like, it was the Allies saying, we're coming in. No, we're coming in. We're coming in. You're not going to have enough ammo. Eventually, you're going to run out of ammo, and we're coming in. And that's, to some degree, what happened. I mean, we took the beach. We ended up taking the beach before they ran out of ammo. Like, we just from sheer fucking willpower and manpower. Because, holy crap, did a lot of young men die that day. But,
yeah, and also, just to point out, it wasn't just America. There was many beachheads on D-Day. It was America, UK, Canada, Australia, and India.
Yep. It was Omaha, Utah, Sword... shit. I know the bigger ones, like Omaha was one of the most...
Yeah, Omaha and Utah, the two most famous. I can't remember them all. I know Sword, because Sword was a huge commando operation for the British. This was a crazy story as well.
Yeah. Yeah. But no, because as terms of the bloodiest operations, one of them was Omaha.
Omaha is the number one.
Yeah. Omaha was the big one, like, which was actually depicted at the very beginning of
Juno.
Juno, thank you.
Yep.
That was Canadian, I think.
Yes, I was going to say that's the Canadian one, which a Canadian in chat just reminded us of.
Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah, no, but Omaha Beach was the brutal one of the Americans landing there, and it's depicted in the fantastic film Saving Private Ryan. And they said it before that if you want to know what it was like to land on D-Day on the beaches in Omaha Beach, just watch that movie and you'll go, oh, okay. It was that, but for a longer time. Yeah. Like, it was that for hours. Like, which is, I'm laughing because I'm scared. Like, okay. Like, fuck that. But, so this was like basically the rest of the world pulling up, I hate to say it, their bootstraps and saying, all right, time to tell Hitler to go fuck himself. And the rest of the world, they rallied together for for these genuine ideologies, you know what I mean, of like of freedom, this like getting rid of this idea of fascism, of this ideology of supremacy and what's like, and being better, being born better. No, that's not how we believe in. That's not what we think in America. That's not what they think in the UK or Canada. No, we think, fuck it. If you're born and you're out here, do your best. Like, yeah, that's America, baby. And I love that. And I'm very proud of that. And and this was something that was like, from then on out, it was just kind of, I don't want to make it sound like it was one victory after another for the Allies, because it was not. Because it
was a bumpy road. Yeah,
it was a bumpy road, but. Because again, you were fighting technologically, the Germans had better, a tank, the Tiger tank, for example, a King Tiger tank, the best tank in World War II. Like, it had the best armor and the best firepower. We had Sherman tanks, which were dope, and they were great and zippy. They were a little zippy. But not quite as good.
I mean, everything that we had to fight the Germans, they had a better version to counter it. Americans also, I think it was the British, bombed a ball bearing factory in Germany, which made for basically the entire war. The German tanks didn't have ball bearings in their gun, which is why they're so infamous for turning so slowly.
That's so funny.
They were not supposed to.
Idea.
They were supposed to turn quickly, but they couldn't. It was metal grinding on metal instead of having ball bearings in there. And they never recovered from that loss because they couldn't afford to rebuild the ball bearing factory. And,
oh my God, that's amazing.
That's a huge win for us.
I know that.
Yeah, but also
that
was when the strategy of camo tanks came into play because they had to now not rely on turning their main guns.
Yeah. It's actually something you see in movies like Saving Private Ryan and shows like Band of Brothers. You actually see them implement that strategy. They would hide tanks behind like giant buildings with like vines hanging down and brush, and then the second like a U.S. truck would take a corner, that's when they'd see the tiny little nozzle sticking out, and it was over at that point.
And there's a famous story. I think the book is called King of the Jungle. It's a book of a crew of a King Tiger crew, one of 3 that existed, I believe, fighting in D-Day, and it's a crazy story. It's all a true story of the German crew of a King Tiger who basically got there. They were very successful, a lot of kills, but eventually their tread broke, and they had to basically like get out with a tank and go try to get through all of Germany. I think only one of them lived. And he's the one who wrote the book, but they had to basically get through all of France and try to get back to Germany on foot during D-Day because their Tiger broke and their crew was like pistols.
Good luck with that. Good Lord. Especially because, bear in mind, like, the paratroopers landed all over France, so, like, just American troops and just Allied troops fucking everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah, that led to, after that battle, a D-Day, it also was a huge morale boost for the Soviets, because they heard word that we basically were successfully able to take a hold of France. Right, yeah, and so and again, like, Hitler at that point was getting squished. He had the Soviets on one side, and then he had, like, he basically, ironically, had the same thing done to him that he and the Soviets did to Poland earlier on in the war. Like, he was getting pincered by both sides. And meanwhile, on on the other front, the Pacific front, like, America's basically island hopping. Again, not easily. It's not an easy thing to do. They're not having a breeze of a time. No. But America is island hopping, taking Guam, taking Iwo Jima, and such, and, like, making their way towards Japan. But America didn't want to land on mainland Japan. They really didn't. And, like, because they knew that was going to be basically another D-Day, another, like, a ridiculous loss of human life, and on both sides. And they were like, well, we got to think of something else. Like, and at the time, of course, there was a certain project going on in a certain city or a certain place called Manhattan that Japan will meet shortly thereafter. But at this point, like, it was, I don't want to say like over for Hitler, but he kept making decisions at this point that kept shooting him in the knee. And thanks to intelligent decisions from Winston Churchill and Eisenhower, like, I almost wanted to say religious, but ideological zealotry lost the war for the Germans. All their top commanders, like Rommel, were dead or defeated and unable to battle anymore. And now they were being led by SS crazy people, basically, who just wanted to see the world burn. Yeah, like this is what's left. After you've fought all the way through your smart intelligence and your wise folk, all you have left is the insane people who started the movement in the first place, and that's what he was left with. And then eventually, like, one of the biggest holdout battles in World War II history is Battle of the Bulge. When like, basically we just dug in. And that was like we talked about trench warfare in World War I. We actually we had a lot of trenches again then. A lot of people got blown up. But eventually they kind of caved, and Hitler, as we all know, it was kind of over because the Soviets kept pushing.
the Allies kept pushing, and Hitler saw the writing on the walls, and he, I don't know what he shot himself with, but I'd like to think it was a Luger. I don't know.
Oops, that's not supposed to be.
What did you, wait, what?
I brought up Pompey. There's the picture I was looking for.
Oh.
This is what was happening right before Hitler did the big...
Yeah.
That's red Soviets from the east and Americans from the west.
And that's
Americans are from the west, pushing in.
This is the way white supremacy dies, right here, baby. Like,
we should say this is the way powerful white supremacy dies.
Yeah, powerful white supremacy dies. Yeah, it'll be there screaming in the shadows, but we'll just keep stomping it out with our boots. But that's basically what it was, And Hitler saw the writing on the walls. He blew his brains out. At that point, too, Japan was like, "Oh shit!" But fuck it, we're gonna keep fighting. Japan did not give up. They saw what happened. They did not care. By the way, I forgot to mention what happened to Mussolini. Fuck happened to him? Oh my god, I forget what happened to Mussolini.
Okay. So Mussolini was the Italian partisan movement was one of the biggest partisan movements of the war. When we were attacking Monte Cristo and Monte Carlo. Monte Cristo. It's a sandwich. Monte Carlo and Monte Cassino. I
just rolled over it. I was like, all right.
Mussolini was getting majorly boned. The Italian partisans killed him, stripped him.
That's right.
I think they cut his penis off and then dragged him through the street, full speed at a car, cheering "Long live Italy."
Oh my god.
And he was strung up. He was strung up in the home square in the Forum of Rome.
People are crazy.
Yeah.
Man.
So that was Mussolini's fate.
Yeah. Okay, that's right. Okay, so Mussolini had that happen, and so at the end of it all, Japan was sitting there, the lone quote unquote Axis powers, who, as you pointed out earlier, really never quite joined fully the Axis powers.
No, they were ideologically aligned, but they were never Axis. But they didn't matter at this point. The factions of the war, the Comintern, the Allies, the co-Eastern Prosperity, Eastern Pacific, whatever prosperity sphere, they all merge into Axis versus Ally, which is why we know it is that, because when the world's at war, it's in its two sides. It doesn't matter what your actual faction is.
Right. It's basically which ideology are you at this point? Are you of the superiority complex or of the freedom complex? And that was basically what it was. And that's I don't want I want people there were economic advantages and disadvantages for winning and losing this war for countries and stuff like that. But I want to make something very, very, very clear. And I've been emphasizing it this entire podcast. It's this war was about the idea of good and evil manifested. If you think because truth be told, good and evil are just that. They're ideas. They're not physical things. The cup in front of me is a physical thing. My car is a thing. I am a physical thing. My brain is a physical thing. Evil and good are ideas. They're not real necessarily. But when you believe in something so strongly, and that belief can take over, then that's when you can see potentially something like good and evil manifest in reality. And that's exactly what happened here, was that this person, Adolf Hitler, truly, truly, truly believed with all of his heart that he was superior until he was shown he wasn't. Until he had nothing left to prove except that you're not superior, dude. You're just a sad, pathetic, coked up man. And that's all it was at the end of the day. Also not attractive looking. He was not good looking.
No.
I don't know why people thought he was superior. I don't know why people were like, oh.
He was a hell of a good
superior.
Speaker?
Oh, he could speaker. Yeah, public speaker points for sure.
I actually have a close friend who was taking a public speaking class this last semester, and they were looking for a speech to base their they had to give a speech on a historical speech that took place, and they wanted something that was a big deal. And I'm like, do the Nuremberg Address. And they thought I was joking, and I was like, no, do the list. There's a reason. And if you want to make a good speech, you can make a speech about him and how he was good at making speeches.
Yeah,
and it was insane. He was extremely good.
Oh yeah,
and he was able to get that, and he was able to get people on his side very easily.
Well, that's why at the beginning of World War II, Germany was nationalistic as fuck. They were so proud of. They were like, "We're Germany, baby. We're the best. Who could beat us?" He brought back Germany's pride after their defeat in World War I, in a huge way. And he gets credit for that. I mean, it sucks because it's that he's a terrible human being, garbage town. But like, you know. But anyway.
So Japan was alone. Hitler had killed itself, and we mentioned the Manhattan Project before.
And yep, this is basically we're coming to the end now.
Yeah, this is the end of the war. Japan refused to give up, though. So
they would not.
And America, like you said, didn't want to attack mainland Japan for two reasons. One, we didn't want to kill civilians.
Nope. Not our game.
It's about to happen, unfortunately, but not without warning. And we didn't want to lose our own troops having to attack mainland Japan, which would have been extending the war for another probable, decade, that taking an island like Japan is not going to be a task you can do quickly.
No.
And so that's when it came down to the Manhattan Project, which this picture I just pulled up.
Yeah, big boom. Yep, that was basically, I mean, and again, there were, I don't want to say we didn't warn them,
We did, we told them this was going to happen. They didn't believe us, because why would you? In their defense, why would you believe we had the power to take out an entire city in one bomb?
Yeah, nothing had ever existed like this. It literally was, it literally seems like, oh, this is the end of the world. And actually, in modern times, Japan, especially if you like Japanese anime, there are so many metaphorical references in basically any shonen or any action anime whatsoever that are direct references to things like Nagasaki and Hiroshima.
Yeah.
So we're talking about that,
But the kicker is a bomb gets dropped, and we show it, and we're sign the surrender, and he says no.
Yeah, I know, yeah.
And then we're like, what do you mean no? Sign the surrender. And he's just and Hirohito's like, no, I won't do it, because clearly you can't do that again. So we did it again.
Yeah.
And then he finally agreed to surrender. And
the surrender is actually very significant. I forget who the general was, or the admiral, whoever it was. But you might remember. No, I'm talking about the famous picture that was taken next to the emperor. But I forget what the guy named.
I have it right here.
But there's a famous picture of after the second bomb was dropped and Japan surrendered. There was a picture taken with the Japanese emperor and the general or whatever. And one of the reasons why he insisted on taking the picture was because he wanted to show the people of Japan that the emperor was small in comparison. That their strong, powerful leader was actually a very tiny man compared to the big American guy. So that was a very big,
There's the picture.
Important thing. Yep, and that was a very big and important thing for them to see. There it is. There's the surrender of Japan, and then from then on out, Japan changed. Boy, howdy, did they change! But again, this is something to
Tojo.
So, yep, that's right.
It was killing me.
So at the end of the war, Hitler's ideas of white supremacy were painted on the walls with his brains. Japan had realized that the way they lived their lives was only ever going to bring about absolute destruction. There was nothing else besides absolute destruction down their path. So they changed their ways. Italy. I'm trying to be it's like the end credit scene where it talks about all the different characters, what they went on to do. Italy went on to be basically not great and continue to be a train wreck.
Yeah, Italy has a rough future, but they get on board with everyone else and they become another, European country. They're relatively chill. France reestablishes itself. They get back on their feet.
Yep. France absolutely does. Yep.
Their next war would be one that we jump into, unfortunately. 20 years after this, we basically just don't stop our war. We go right into Korea.
Yep.
Which is another story to talk about. Churchill became the prime minister still. He won another election after the war.
No surprise there.
The king died right after the war. Queen Elizabeth II was crowned, who is still the queen today. So that was England.
Which is fucking wild to think about. She's still alive. She can't be alive because of normal. She's not alive because of natural means.
Did you hear about recent news?
Voodoo magic. No, what's going on?
She's not going to make any public appearances until at least February.
Oh, she's dead.
I think it's happening.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, I mean,
they don't just do that. You know what I mean? They don't just do that. Something's happening.
They might be literally trying. Maybe she's already dead, and they're like, we gotta get her.
No, 100%. I believe that could be the case. Yeah. Like shit. Who are we crowning? like it's just
Fuck,
it's a messy situation.
Yeah.
You know, for as little power the royal family has, they actually, if you like that history at all, watch the show The Crown. It's amazing.
My mom loves that show.
It's really good. If you like that at all, it is crazy how much power they actually have just by basic opinion.
Yeah.
The opinion of the Queen, even today, can sway masses of people, which is why they're not allowed to talk about politics.
It's pretty fucking wild, actually. It is kind of silly. But,
yeah,
you know,
there's people actually. A lot of people in the UK actually care about the Queen. Who are we leaving anyone out? Well,
I was about to say. I mean, well, no.
Australia gains independence.
Oh,
India gains independence. This guy named Gandhi gets in power in India.
Right.
Maybe heard of him.
Heard of him.
Yeah, Siam was dissolved in the treaty.
Yep. Siam's gone.
The Soviet Union had a great time.
The Soviet Union was a big fan of that thing we dropped on Japan. They were like, what are you
they were really interested in it. Yeah, weirdly, they were like obsessed with it.
And I don't like. It's almost as if it like helped lead to something that was super cold.
Yeah.
Wink.
Clicks end stream button.
Yeah, right.
Next time.
No. Imagine we just go right to the Cold War. Oh God. Ugh, we could though. Oh my God. We'd have to get through the 50s, 60s.
I want to do so many.
We'll get there. We need a fantasy one next week.
Oh well, we're gonna do something like that. It's gonna be fantastic. That's for sure. It's not gonna be as we've been too hard hitting on cult history, where we need to take a wildness break, which we're gonna do next week. But I think that's it for this episode. Really, World War II's over.
Yeah, World War II's over. The last great war between good and evil.
And that was a very brief and not 100% accurate overview of World War II, getting basically history done quick mode. I
mean that's how
I know for sure both of us will be going deeper into specific parts later.
Oh yeah, there's so much to talk about here. Yeah, and again, and like Atlas said, every time we do Lord of Lords, we love to focus on we love to try to focus on the things about the wars that fascinated us the most, and just the things in history in general. So, and sometimes that means we have to talk about things that we're not as familiar with, and we do make mistakes on dates, times, locations, leaders, like, you know what I mean? Even like the events and certain people starting certain fights and everything like that, like, you know, poke and hoop. Like, sometimes those details slip through the crack. We do our best to try to get the accurate correctly. And if anybody has corrections and ever wants to send them to us on Discord or whatever, like, you can feel free to, and we'll be happy to even, like, be like, oh, I said this last time.
Yeah, for sure.
To say this. Like, we'll be happy to correct
especially an episode like this, because this was such a big, broad it's too much to talk about in an hour. So, you know, we're at almost 2 hours now.
Yeah. I was more upset. What I loved about this so much was I loved, like, what led to... And what I wanted to talk about, and I feel like I did a pretty decent job talking about, is how, like, these ideologies were defeated. You know what I mean? Like, because I wanted to talk about a broader sense of, like, again, I focused on the good versus evil thing a lot because I wanted people to understand. It's just like, when evil becomes when the ideas of good and evil become manifested, this is what it looks like. It looks like absolute misery. You know what I mean? It's terrifying, you know? So it's like, when you're going to fight a war, don't fight a war based on ideology. Fight a war based on defense, you know, and peace, the idea of stopping. The idea of stopping the fighting, you know. And World War II is that example. Unfortunately, we Americans made so much money in World War II, we were like, we could keep doing this.
Look at all this money! Yeah.
We could keep doing this.
The war economy never slowed down.
And then the Pentagon gets funded more than anything else.
It's
goddamn whatever. But
it's a lot.
Like, you could literally argue that every war the United States fought after this war was based on money and and influence more so than it was for the good of anybody. And like, we saved
the world, and then
now we wanted to continue.
Yeah, exactly. We wanted to keep saving the world even when there was nothing to save it from.
Exactly, and that's basically what kind of is happening now. Anyway,
that's the end of the World War II episode, everybody.
Yeah, really kind of depressing, but anyway, thank you guys so much. And wait, so are we doing next week? Did you say we're doing next week?
What date is next week? I'm going to say, when's Christmas? So we have one.
We have a couple weeks before Christmas.
Okay. Yeah, I think we're probably going to skip Christmas.
So we won't do the 23rd.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll do the 9th, the 16th, and then come back on the 30th.
Correct.
Okay.
That sounds good to me.
Great, sounds good to me. All right, great. So we have 2 more weeks of Lore Lords. Next week is an Atlas subject. The week after that will be mine. I'm definitely going to pick a fantasy subject. I love the history. Atlas and I both have talked about World War I and II off stream a couple times being like very fascinating subjects to us.
Yeah, and if you want to hear us talk about it more off stream of this podcast and on stream live, twitch.tv/Pat Weston.
It's true. I'm actually going to stop my recording right now. Thanks everybody for listening to the podcast.
Yeah, have a great time.